Sir, the armoured car has 2 sections pinned down on the right. They got a man down. I think they're pulling back. Ah, damn it. Yes, I see that. Right, you men, get that bloody 3-inch mortar going. And where the bloody hell is that 2-pounder? Get those lads up here. We need to knock out that armoured car before he cuts us to shreds. Very well, sir. I'll find them and I'll bring them up. Yes, do that. Make sure it's bloody quick as well. Sir, 2 sections have managed to pull back. Oh, good. Right. Finally, the mortar's going. Where's the 2-pounder? Come on, get that bloody gun up here. The Germans are trying to flank us. Hey, 2 sections taking a hammering. Right, steady there, lads, steady there. Right, target sighted. Moving left to right. Stand by. Right, fire. Good hit, reload, quick. And fire. Fire! Second Lieutenant Hubert Templeton had been put in command of 4 Platoon, B Company, of the 1st Battalion of the Rifle Brigade, as his first posting. Please note, the Rifle Brigade is not actually a brigade field formation, but is instead the name of the regiment. And the 1st Battalion of that regiment was a motorised battalion, trained and equipped to support the fast-moving armoured forces. Under Lieutenant Templeton's command were, of course, the standard 3 sections of infantry, and being a motorised unit, these sections were made up of 8 men and carried a Bren gun, as well as a boys anti-tank rifle per section. And to add to that firepower, the platoon was armed with a 3-inch mortar. This was something of an anomaly. It was supposed to be a 2-inch mortar, but unfortunately there were not enough of those to go around. Having the more powerful 3-inch mortar sounds good, of course, but there was also a shortage of ammunition for that particular weapon. And of course, being part of a motorised battalion, each section within the platoon, including the small headquarters element, were equipped with their own trucks, allowing for fast and long-range movement across the battlefield. 4 Platoon had been called forward to support some British troops that had been cut off following a failed attack against the enemy forces. And as 4 Platoon advanced towards the enemy, it picked up some stragglers, men who were lost and had been cut off from their units. The crew of a 2-pound anti-tank gun with the gun found themselves being picked up by 4 Platoon as they made their way down the road, dragging their gun behind them. They hooked their gun up to one of the trucks and joined 4 Platoon in their mission. And later, the crew of a knocked out British tank, making their way back from the front line, also joined 4 Platoon to support them in their advance. 4 Platoon had been ordered to push forward, pushing through the enemy screening forces, and so launch assaults on a pair of chateaux being held by the enemy. The plan was for 4 Platoon to hold on to these 2 locations, which would be used to allow retreating British forces to rendezvous there, reorganise and set up a better defence. Right then, 1 section, 2 section, lead the way. Rest of the platoon, follow on. Right, let's get on with it. But keep your bloody eyes peeled, we don't know what's in front of us, Lieutenant Templeton had ordered as his platoon began its advance. His men were advancing in the customary T formation, with 2 sections up front, HQ element with the support equipment coming up behind, and 3 section coming up behind those in reserve. The trucks and hangers-on would come up behind the platoon as it advanced and took ground. And the platoon had only gone forward about 150 yards before they came under fire from their left flank. An enemy soldier armed with a MG34 light machine gun. "Take cover, get down!" Sergeant McClure ordered the men as they advanced across the field, and the first burst of machine gun fire went right over their heads. "Get that bloody mortar firing!" he shouted to the 3-inch mortar crew, and overcoming their initial shock at coming under fire, the men of the platoon began to return fire, as more German firing positions were located. At last, the 3-inch mortar was laid on to their targets, and had begun firing shot after shot towards the enemy machine gunner. And as 1 section and 2 section continued to engage the enemy to the front, Lieutenant Templeton ordered 3 section to move to the left and outflank the enemy position. "Right lads, let's go!" Corporal Gilbert ordered as his men got up and ran, as best they could under the weight of their equipment. There was not a lot of hard cover for them to use in order to close with the enemy, and so they would have to rely on bushes. But even as they moved, the 3-inch mortar delivered a direct hit right on top of the enemy machine gunner, killing him instantly. But 3 section continued on its move to the left flank to guard against further attack from that direction. "Right then, push on chaps, push on now." Lieutenant Templeton ordered his leading sections as they began to advance once again towards the first of the enemy-held chateaux. until at last the men of one section came into direct contact with the German troops defending the chateau. They were met by a strong withering fire and went to ground immediately. "Get that fucking Bren gun going!" Corporal Green, the one section commander, shouted to his Bren gunner. "Whack that motorbike!" he ordered to the man holding the boy's anti-tank rifle. And indeed, the German soldier manning a machine gun in the sidecar of the motorbike was killed by direct hit from the anti-tank rifle, which with its very high velocity made a half-decent sniper rifle. With the sidecar mounted machine gun now unmanned, 4 platoon had room to breathe, and the platoon's 3-inch mortar was firing round after round into the chateau. 3 section had moved up on the left under the cover of the mortar barrage, and the section commander, Corporal Gilbert, was leading his men forward, crawling from one piece of cover to another, hoping to get within grenade distance so they could start tossing grenades into the chateau. 2 section, move forwards, 2 section! Lieutenant Templeton shouted, and indeed, 2 section got up and ran forwards to a new piece of cover from where they can engage the chateau from another side. But at this point, German reinforcements began to arrive from the east. In fact, the men at the second chateau, further east, had launched a counterattack now, and it was 2 section caught out in the open that would receive the brunt of this attack. With the German infantry was an armoured car that began to fire its machine guns towards 2 section, wounding several men and killing 1. 2 section's anti-tank gunner tried to get it to a better firing position from where he could engage the armoured car, but the grass and foliage made it difficult. At last he fired off several shots towards the armoured car, causing some damage, but the German infantry supporting the armoured car made his job very difficult, and a burst from the armoured car sent him scurrying for cover. "Bloody hell, Corporal, we've got to retreat!" one of the men shouted to his section commander, Corporal Fraser, as a machine gun round ricocheted off his own rifle. And indeed, 2 section were attempting to pull back, crawling across the ground, using whatever cover they could find, keeping as low to the ground as they could, as more and more German soldiers arrived to continue their counterattack towards 4 platoon's positions. "Fuck it, lads, just leg it! Leg it!" Corporal Fraser shouted, and the 7 surviving men of 2 section got up and sprinted as fast as they could, under fire, to reach shelter from the enemy machine guns. 3 section on the left had continued to keep the men in the chateau at bay, making it impossible for them to join their comrades in their little counterattack. But the German armoured car and the infantry coming from the east were making things difficult for the rest of 4 platoon. "Bring that bloody 2-pounder up here, we need it!" Lieutenant Templeton ordered to his batman, who scurried off to find the 2-pounder gun crew and bring them forwards. The boy's anti-tank rifle could knock out a armoured car with relative ease, but getting into a firing position was very difficult for the infantrymen under fire from the armoured car's machine guns. The 2-pounder gun, however, had an armoured shield that would protect its crew as they pushed the gun into position, allowing them to engage the armoured car with their gun. And indeed, they actually got into position without the German armoured car being aware of their presence. The 2-pounder's first shot towards the armoured car successfully decapitated the machine gunner atop the vehicle, manning the vehicle's MG34 machine gun. Quickly reloading, the second shot of the 2-pounder succeeded in scoring a mobility kill on the vehicle, and its driver abandoned his vehicle. And so, with the armoured car knocked out, its firepower no longer an effect on the battlefield, Lieutenant Templeton was quite happy to let the German infantry continue with their counterattack, whilst the platoon's 3-inch mortar, the light Bren guns of the sections, continued to engage the enemy as they come across the open field. On the right flank, however, 2 section very nearly had their flank turned. 1 German soldier even got close enough to throw a grenade into the section's position, and Corporal Reese Fraser ordered his section back once more to take up a new position beside the road, just to the right of 1 section's position. But aside from giving a bit of ground on the right, 4 platoon were holding on without too much trouble, and every yard of ground the Germans managed to gain came at a heavy cost. 4 platoon's 3-inch mortar was really taking a toll on the German troops, caught out in the open by the Bren guns of the sections, and 3 section on the left continued to pin down German troops in and around the chateau. Almost as suddenly as it had begun, the German counterattack ended. The survivors withdrew, leaving their beleaguered colleagues in the chateau to face the British assault. 1 and 3 section moved forwards, surrounding the building from 2 sides and assaulting from 2 directions. However, 1 man from 3 section, their anti-tank gunner, was wounded by a grenade throw from one of the German soldiers within the buildings, and Lieutenant Templeton moved his own headquarters element forwards along with the mortar to provide support. One of the medics who had been attached to the platoon but was not officially part of the platoon strength was called forward to assist the wounded man with 3 section. And Sergeant McClure ordered one of the runners from the headquarters element to run back to the tank crew, who at this time had been sitting with the trucks, effectively acting as observers to the rear. 2 of the men were called forwards to man one of the German vehicles that had been abandoned near the chateau. The vehicle had a dorsal mounted MG34 and would provide a good deal of fire support for the men going forwards. Needless to say, the tankmen were only too happy to lend a hand to finally get back into action after having lost their tank in an earlier battle. The 2 men eagerly mounted the captured vehicle and moved it forwards to support 3 section on the left flank, firing steady bursts of machine gun fire towards German forces trying to claw their way through an orchard between the 2 chateaux. Whilst 1 and 3 section, together with the headquarters element and the vehicle mounted by the tankmen, were holding the chateau from German counterattacks, moving through the orchard from the 2nd chateau, 2 section, on the right, had been assisting the other men of the tank section in preparation to move forwards and capture the armoured car that had been knocked out by the 2-pounder gun. Having taken a quick look at the vehicle through a set of binoculars, one of the tank crewmen insisted that he could fix it. Just give me a bit of time and some cover and I could get that thing working again. Damage to that vehicle was relatively light. It had after all been abandoned following a glancing blow from the 2-pounder, and of course after the gunner atop the vehicle had been killed. 2 sections moved forwards to secure the area near to the vehicle and allow the tankmen to move up and begin their repairs. Until at long last, Corporal Fraser signalled across to Lieutenant Templeton that the vehicle repairs were complete, it was in working order and was now about to move towards the enemy, manned by the men of the Royal Tank Regiment, out for revenge. However, these tankmen were to be somewhat disappointed. Most of the enemy strength in the area had been sat in the German counterattacks towards 4 platoons' positions, and not much remained now at the 2nd chateau to the east, but the few survivors of the failed attacks. And indeed, all this time, Lieutenant Templeton and Sergeant McClure had had a brief discussion trying to figure out how best to attack this 2nd position to the east. A plan had been formulated and it got sprung into action. "Drop some smoke on those wee bastards," Sergeant McClure ordered the 3-inch mortar crew, and immediately they began to shoot their 3-inch mortar smoke rounds straight on top of the enemy position at the chateau. "Don't save anything, use it all. The thicker the smoke, the easier it will be for us to assault," Sergeant McClure said to the mortarman as he moved back to the headquarters element. Slowly but surely, the sections of 4 platoon began to move into position around the chateau in preparation for their final assault on their final objective, using the smoke cover as they did so. No return fire was coming from the German positions, and Lieutenant Templeton hoped that the Germans may in fact come up with their hands up, saving his men from a potentially very bloody assault. But at long last, under cover of smoke, the 3 rifle sections of 4 platoon had moved up around the chateau, in preparation for the final assault, and they did so with the support of the 2 German vehicles that had been captured earlier in the battle. Everything was set, and at last, Lieutenant Templeton gave the order, "Right chaps, push on, move in." "Right 3 sections, follow me," Corporal Gilbert ordered to his men as they moved up towards the wall of the chateau. 2 sections began to move in from the southeast, and 1 section worked around towards the northern part of the buildings. And immediately, 1 section sighted German tank weapons inside the chateau, and a pair of grenades thrown through the windows badly wounded a number of German defenders inside the courtyard. "Stop fucking standing around and get in there," Corporal Green shouted to his men as he pushed them in towards the doorway. It stands to reason that nobody wants to be the first man in. But at last, his men moved forwards, pushing up towards the doorway and moved into the courtyard area. A German light anti-tank gun with its crew sat squat amongst the detritus inside the courtyard, and 1 section engaged its explosive ring, finishing it off with a grenade. 4 platoon had succeeded in its assault and had captured its objectives. Their first action of their war had been creditable. It had cost 4 platoon 5 casualties, 2 KIA and 3 lightly wounded, requiring the help of a medic. Estimations said that 4 platoon had managed to knock out an entire company of German infantry in their battle. and the chateaus would provide a safe place for retreating British forces to stop, resupply, reorganise and prepare for a better defence. Lieutenant Templeton hoped now that his platoon would be allowed to rest for a couple of days, but this was wishful thinking. They were sorely needed. The Germans were launching an attack that, if successful, would encircle a large body of British and Allied troops, cutting them off and leaving them trapped. 4 Platoon, along with the rest of B Company of the 1st Battalion of the Rifle Brigade, were moving to stop the advancing German forces.